at Urbana-Champaign, where I was department head for 5 years. Eventually, I left the academy, and as Katisha said, I started the business. And it has grown exponentially, and now I have a staff of about 10 people, and together we have worked with over 6,000 clients working on job application documents, interview preparation, negotiating help, which is something I absolutely love. I love it when people get the jobs and then we negotiate a really great offer. And also things like book proposals, grant proposals, and things like that. So I have written a book. I wanted to make sure you know about it. And I was so pleased that Sergio said it had been assigned for a class that he was in. So if you find what I'm talking about helpful, please do get the book. It's about $12 on Amazon, and it goes into way more detail about specifics, including model language that you can use in your documents, like your research statement, your teaching statement, and so on. So you'll find that information there. If any of you live tweet, feel free to use the hashtag #ProfIsInOnCampus. You're not required to. And I am Professor is in on Twitter. And I hope that some of you are active on Twitter. I'm going to talk about social media a little bit momentarily. And if you take it, well, I guess you won't take pictures since I'm just a strange head on a screen. So never mind about that. But anyway, all right, so let's get started. The most important thing for anyone, by the way, can I pause and ask, are we all grad students here? Are there some postdocs, people who've already finished? Katisha probably has to tell me.
I think everybody's a grad student.
Grad student, okay, cool, thank you. So while you're in graduate school, the most important thing to do is to have a job-focused state of mind. And that may strike some of you as obvious, but it is far from obvious. It is absolutely contrary to the ethos of PhD programs for the most part, which are very much invested in a kind of focus on esoteric scholarly inquiries and making sure that you know your literature and the scholarships and the lab work and the experimentation, the data, the analysis, the theory, and not so much about let's like package this and say, how are these skills training you? How are these job skills, basically? So you may or may not get support for that from your professors. Some may be more on board with it than others, but it really doesn't matter. Even if none of your professors are on board with this, you need to be on board with it. You are the captain of your professional ship. It is you who has to get a job at the end of this. So no matter what kind of support you are not getting from your department, I hope you're getting good support, but you can't guarantee that. Please have a job-focused state of mind. So that means that in relation to the tenure track job search that you say no to denial. It is as bad as you've heard. It's probably worse than you've heard. I'm going to tell you how bad it is. I always do that. It is a depressing part of my talk. But it is so important to me to make sure that you don't allow denial to stop you from the job prep work that you need to be doing, both academic and post-academic. So, very nutshell summary of the job market. Universities are obviously in a tremendous state of crisis, and they have been for a very long time. They have been for so long that crisis is no longer the proper word to use, because the definition of crisis is something that has suddenly occurred, watershed moment, and something's going to quickly transform and it's going to quickly evolve into something else. But that's not the case with this deterioration of the academic job market. It's been happening since about 1975. And it is absolutely transparent. You can look at any data. You could Google a search string, tenure track job market, and the data will be right there. It is not hidden. It has been a steady disintegration of our market since the 1970s. So, and the causes are economic. Obviously, there has been a steady stream of defunding of higher ed, and the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, of course, worsened that. But the market has not recovered when the economy has quote unquote recovered. That's because there's been a political shift in our country, and I'm sure that you know it. I don't have to say much about politics right now for us all to know that it's a kind of a disaster. But in terms of higher ed, there is no longer, it's a neoliberal shift, a shift toward a neoliberal ethos. There's no longer a belief in a public good. So higher ed is a public good. That we no longer believe that is something that is deserving of public funding. Instead, it has become transformed into a commodity that has to be paid for on a consumer basis. And so universities are seen and looked at on a business logic. And so a business logic then makes it the imperative to cut costs. Well, what are the greatest costs of any business? Human resources and full-time employees. So like every other business in the United States, full-time hiring has been decimated since the 1970s. This particular graph is the humanities. It only goes back to 2000, so it's not giving you, if it went back to 1975, it would show a very clear downward trajectory that looks like this. I hope you can see me. I know I'm really little, but anyway, with a particularly precipitous drop at 2009. It did bounce back a tiny bit. People thought, oh, yay, recovery. Well, as you can see, it then proceeded to drop further and return to those low levels. STEM fields are, for the most part, similar outside of some of the really applied fields like engineering. Engineering does fairly well. Computer science does quite well. A few other applied science fields do okay, but the many STEM fields do very, very badly. Biology is well known. They keep a track of their data there, and something like 12% of biology PhDs actually get a tenure track job. This data comes from the Cheeky Scientist, which is a STEM-focused post-academic training business and consultancy. You can check them out if you want to. I'm not affiliated with them, but they keep track of some good data about this. So as you can see, over 80% of life science PhDs will not have a paying job at time of their finishing their degree. So where are who is staffing universities? Who is teaching the classes? Adjuncts and other contingent faculty. So now contingent faculty constitute about 76% of all university instructors across the board at every rank and type of institution in the United States. So please don't substitute in your mind what I know some of you want to do. Oh, that's community colleges. Oh, that's tiny teaching colleges. No, University of Oregon. I'm based in Eugene, Oregon. I used to teach at Oregon. Up until a couple years ago, it was about 69% contingent. NYU is notorious for this. It's about over 70% contingent. So, and these are major research institutions. There are different types of contingent positions. Of course, some are multi-year and have benefits and full-time. Some of them are just adjunct positions where you come in and you teach a course for about $2,000 a course or $3,000. 25% of adjuncts live below the US poverty line. Okay, I want you to know this so that you cannot claim there's no plausible deniability for you after this talk. You have been told the information. What does this mean for you in grad school as a job seeker? It means that the idea that this is a vocation and a calling, that you can't put a price tag on it, that you are born to do this work and you will die trying. These are all very common among PhD students. I say this with great sympathy. I was the same way. That's very dangerous. The times have changed to the extent that you have to really be much more clear-eyed about it. What is your return on investment for the time that you are spending and the money you are probably spending in graduate school? And by the way, the whole issue of grad school debt is something I've also looked into. I'm not going to talk about it today, but we can talk about it in Q&A if you want to. So this is now my last slide on this depressing stuff because, whoop, so sorry. I'm going to switch the angle here now. I've looked at what this means for you as a job seeker, but what does this mean for the faculty who are reading your applications? Well, this is a thread from Facebook among my full professor friends at public R1 institutions that just popped up in 2016. And one of them said, my department has lost a net of 21 full-time faculty since 2010. We may get to hire one next year. Her friends chimed in talking about the loss of faculty in their departments. This is what this looks like on the other side. When jobs disappear, departments shrink outside of those fields that I was telling you that are doing okay. Departments shrink. What does that mean? That means that the fewer number of faculty are doing the same amount of service and administrative and teaching work that there was before, but they have fewer colleagues to do it, which means the service burden has drastically increased on the faculty who remain. This impacts you as a job seeker. The impact is that the committee who is reading your applications are quite stressed out. They're teaching heavier loads. They're doing it with less support. They have less administrative support. There are more and more people applying for jobs. And so they have less and less time to commit to the task of reviewing applications. They are rushing through as fast as they can. It is quite common knowledge among faculty that they spend about 2 minutes per file at the initial review stage. That means your CV and your cover letter are getting a total together of about 2 minutes. There was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Ed that was, mourning the state of affairs. And the comment thread to it, I just remember, I'll never forget this chemist who wrote in and said, well, yes, what you're saying is absolutely true, but I see no problem with it. We just ran a search in my department and I decided to test it out. So I took the number of files I reviewed and the amount of time I spent, and I discovered that I spent 1.47 minutes per file per candidate. And I see no problem with that, he said. I just counted up whoever had the most peer-reviewed journal articles, and they made my short list. That's really intense. Not everybody is that intense, but there are people who are like that. So this is insight number one that I really want you to remember from this talk. If you don't remember like lots of stuff, which of course I hope you do, they need to reject you, and it is not personal. They don't have anything against you and your research and whatever you represent, but they have to cut the numbers as fast as they can. So the number is going to be different for every field. A field like cultural anthropology, we probably have 350, 400 applicants. A field like English often has like 900 to 1,000 applicants in certain subfields. Other fields are much smaller. They may be only 125, 150, but these are fairly large numbers. They have to get to what's called the long short list, which is about 25 people. 25 people is a manageable number. That means they have to cut, if they get 500, they have to cut 475. And they have to do it really, really fast. So this impacts what you do. It impacts you as a job seeker in terms of the record that you create and the way you represent it in your cover letter and CV and your other job documents. So that's what I'm going to talk about with the rest of today. The way not to get rejected is like I just said, a combination of your record and your application materials. And later, of course, if you make it through that onto that long short list, your interview skills. Now, this probably seems like duh, obviously. This is so stating the obvious. But actually, what I've learned when I was a professor, and now as the professor is in, that PhD students have no idea what constitutes a competitive record for the job market, and have even less idea how to articulate that in their job applications. So that's where the professor is in comes in. So here's the gold standard for a competitive record. Referee journal articles. What that chemist said is accurate. Not everybody is quite as cut and dried as he is. Sometimes they might weight other things like grants or teaching a little bit more, but the gold standard for the job market is refereed journal articles. So you want to prioritize that to the extent that you can. Grant money is a close second, and preferably national or international grants as opposed to campus level grants. High prestige national conferences are a close third, as opposed to graduate student conferences and so on. You also might want to consider cultivating a well-known recommender from another campus. This is not crucial, but competitive job applicants often have a letter writer who is from perhaps a higher ranked campus, a higher ranked department somewhere else. And teaching, sure, teaching counts. You are going to be a teacher in some form, but don't overdo it. Teaching does not get you. If you don't have the journal articles, grants, conferences, and solid recommendations, teaching is not going to overcome that. That's one of the points where grad students are often confused. So to get a job, to be competitive, as you look at your days in grad school, looking ahead with that job-oriented state of mind that I told you to have, you want to make sure that you have intensive productivity with a forward arc. That means what are you producing now, and what's in the pipeline that you're going to be producing later. So don't look backward to your comprehensive exams or a class that you took. Those things are obsolete in a job seeker identity. When you write a cover letter or go to an interview, it is meaningless to talk about, oh, I did my comprehensive and blah, blah, blah. That's a grad student identity. That's obsolete. You're now applying to be a peer. And so your trajectory of productivity has to be forward looking toward tenure. Professionalization means that you understand how to comport yourself like a faculty peer and not like a grad student. Those of you who've read my book or my blog, you know that I have a thing against backpacks. Backpacks make you look like a grad student oftentimes, with a certain amount of disciplinary variation, because, for example, astronomers, I don't know if I have any astronomers here, astronomers all carry backpacks, regardless of rank. So if you're in that field, disregard what I'm saying. But there are things you can do to professionalize yourself. Autonomy and self-respect means that you have left behind the grad student peon mentality and are articulating yourself as a peer, a scholarly peer. That's very difficult for grad students to do. Probably the single hardest thing. Don't be afraid to promote yourself. Make sure that people know your name. When you go to the national conferences, don't hide in your hotel room. Come downstairs, go down the elevator, go to the open bar at the business meeting. Those are two different things. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Make sure that people know who you are. Go up and meet the people who gave the talks that you really liked, shake their hands and introduce yourself. And finally, maybe in spite of all of this other stuff, remember that by the time you get to a campus visit, they are evaluating your collegiality. So you do want to remember not to neglect the rest of your human profile. Be a human being. They will appreciate that. Okay, so here's now the crux. What do you do in grad school to prepare for a job? If you're, let's say if you're writing a dissertation, well, obviously you're writing a dissertation. Write that dissertation with an eye to publishing. And put the most effort into the chapters that are going to be convertible to peer-reviewed publications. Also remember that the best dissertation is finished. I'm sure you've heard that, but please don't get hung up on the minutia of the dissertation because people don't read them. People don't read them. You know, I hate to say it, but you know, half your committee might not even read it. Oh, I didn't just say that. They will read it when it's published. So that's where your effort has to go. So please remember, don't unbalance that. You have limited time and effort and energy. Make sure you put it where it's really going to count for you. Now, strategizing publications, this is the sort of bad news that makes grad students want to tear their hair out, and I'm very sympathetic. But when you publish to get a job, 9 times out of 10, the publications that you did before you take the job will not count toward your tenure case. 9 times out of 10, they will only count the publications that date from after you're under contract. So you do have to be strategic and think about, you know, I can get 2 of these chapters published prior to getting a job, but after that, I need to hold back a certain amount of substance that I'm going to be able to publish from while I'm on the tenure track. If you're in a book field, and that's the humanities or soft social sciences. You do need to be able to talk about a plan for the book. They will expect that. They will want to know. It doesn't mean you have to have the book done by any means, but it does mean that you have an intelligent idea of which press you're going to submit to, and maybe you've talked to an editor about it. It is absolutely important, as I said, to have some soul teaching experience, but do be aware that adjuncting continual teaching does begin to have opportunity cost. You're not going to get much credit for teaching more than about 3 classes in terms of on your CV, and it is going to suck up your time from doing those peer-reviewed journal articles and so on that I was talking about. One of the best ways that you can promote yourself and get ready for the job market is to organize a panel for your national conference if your conference allows grad students to do that. Not all do, most do. The reason you want to organize a panel is because it gives you a chance to reach out to assistant professors in the field, not other grad students. Don't organize it with other grad students. Reach out to assistant professors or other faculty, invite them to be on the panel, and invite someone well-known to be the discussant. The reason this is good is because A, it's networking, you get to meet all these folks. B, you get to invite them to lunch or dinner or breakfast or beers or coffee or whatever it is you do, but it's more networking. Really get to know those people. 3, am I doing 1, 2, 3 or ABC? I can't remember. Anyway, you're going to get a better crowd because you're a grad student. Not that many people are going to come to see you. No reflection on you. You just don't have much profile at this point. But they are going to come to see the better known, more senior people. That means you're going to get a bigger audience and more exposure for your work. All right, I've already talked about having a letter writer. And of course, in STEM fields in particular, but in all fields, applying for all the grants that you can is very, very important to show your credibility. By the way, I realize I forgot a major point that I always make on that previous slide. The reason that grants and conferences are so important is not just because grants give you cash and conferences give you networking, although both of those are very true. It's because they're additional evidence of peer review. To get into a major national conference, you have to go through a peer review process. To get a major national or international grant, you have to go through a peer review process. By having those 3 kinds of peer review, the journal, article, grant, and conference, you are coming to a search committee pre-vetted, if that makes sense. Your CV is going to show, oh, she's already done all this stuff. A bunch of these other people have already rubber stamped her research and said it's fantastic and competitive. That immediately puts you in a separate category for the job search. Okay, so now let's talk about some more details. I told you I'd talk about social media. I'm talking about social media. It is absolutely just indispensable for career building in the academy. They will Google you. They will. They won't do it when there's 500 applicants. That would be like impossible. But when you get to the long short list of 25, you are highly likely to be Googled. You want to know what they're seeing. So this is extremely uncomfortable, but please tonight go and Google your name and see what comes up. Maybe a very unpleasant experience, but you want to make sure you're doing that before the search committee does it. The best thing you can do is have a website or an academia.edu or profile or a Vitae Chronicle Vitae profile that gives your photo, a very simple short 2-paragraph research description, your CV, maybe some sample syllabi, links to your articles, just a very easy, comprehensive place where people can see who you are and what you do. That's a landing pad. That allows you to control what they see, what your profile is on the internet. Please only use professional looking photos. And and really look at what is social media per se saying about you. So a lot of academics set their Facebook settings very high for privacy and keep that for their personal life. But Twitter is very, very active in terms of academic community building. So I strongly urge you to get on Twitter, to use Twitter, to encounter people in your field through Twitter. Some of you in Q&A may ask me, Karen, is there a risk to using Twitter in the present moment? Please ask me that, because that's an interesting question, but I'm not going to talk about it right now. I'm just going to tell you, go ahead and go on Twitter. All right. By the way, why go on Twitter? Because you're going to meet people that you would never otherwise meet. Scholars who live internationally, scholars who live on the West Coast, just people, if you saw them at a conference, they would be surrounded by their entourage. You'd never get through to them, but Twitter gives you that access. So, okay. As you're in grad school and your career building, please do beware of the temptation to take every invitation that is sent your way. It's something that almost everybody does. If you ask your profs, they'll probably have a story like this. I never knew one who didn't. Basically, someone says to you, hey, come do a chapter in my book. And you're like, okay. Well, don't just do every chapter in every book that people ask you for. It's a terrible mistake. First of all, chapters are not as good as journal articles. So some of your best stuff will be lost in the chapter. But second of all, even possibly worse problem is edited collections can take 4 or 5 years to come out. They're notoriously slow. And you can't afford that when you're on the job market. You need that thing to come out quickly so that it's on your CV as a publication. So that's a very common example. Also, graduate student conferences, very, very valuable, wonderful things to do, great, experience, but they're not great lines on your CV. And if you're in a book field, beware of third-tier presses that come chasing you to publish with them. If they chase you, they are probably a third-tier press. If they're a first-tier press, you kind of have to chase them. That's kind of how it is. So make sure that you read the chapter in my book called Don't Get Your Career at Costco. All right, so here you are. You're on the market. What are you trying to emphasize? You want to understand that they are looking at your tenure ability. This is probably shocking to you. You're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? I'm in graduate school. I haven't even defended yet. How can they be looking at my tenure ability? But they are. They don't want to have to fire you. That's a horrible situation that involves lawsuits. They don't want it. They want to hire you and know you're going to get tenure, so they need to see evidence of it. So this means that you have to have that forward-looking plan that I was talking about. In my book, I have a version of what's on the slide here. It's a 5-year plan. My first PhD student ever in my career, she made this back in 2003, and I've never seen anything better. And it changed because she did it. And I was so impressed with watching how this worked for her that I had all of my students do it, other students do it, and then I put it in the book. So basically, the font might be very small. You might not be able to see it, but it's okay. Basically, it's deadlines. That's all it is. It's looking ahead to the conferences you intend to go to and the deadlines for applying for them. It's planning ahead for your comprehensive exams, for your proposal defense, for your dissertation defense. My student had planned it out. This was 03. She was looking at June 07, and she was saying, I think I'm going to defend then. I can't remember whether she defended in June 07. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. With each passing year, you update this thing, and it gets more and more accurate for each coming year. But she never missed a grant for her field work in anthropology, for her dissertation writing, for postdocs. She never missed any deadline. They were all here. She was extremely successful. She was not the most brilliant student I ever worked with. She had enormous struggle with the analytical part of doing cultural anthropology, but she was so organized and so resourceful that she got a tenure track job in her first year of trying. She finished her book. She went on sabbatical. She got, I think I got that out of order. She finished her book. She got tenure. She went on sabbatical. She's working on her second book, all because she has this level of forward-looking planning. So I urge you to do that. Okay, so now moving on, one of the most important things for you to do, and this is in some ways the second major point I want you to remember from this talk, if nothing else, is you do have to make a transition psychically in your own mind from peon grad student to peer potential colleague. This is really hard because you've only ever been a grad student. You have not been a colleague. So nobody's teaching you how to do this, but you have to do it for yourself. Because if you go into a job search feeling like a grad student, you're going to make a desperate, insecure appeal like a grad student and not like someone that they want to pursue to be one of their colleagues. So it means owning that you are, in fact, the expert in your field. You're the expert in your niche, in your topic. You're it. You're the expert. I imagine you're not used to thinking of yourself that way, but that's what you have to do as you get ready for the market. So there's some low-hanging fruit. Think about how you dress. And if you say to me, or think it, which some of you probably are you kidding me? Have you seen how faculty dress? You have to dress better than faculty because you're a job seeker. So you don't have to do it now. You don't have to do it while you're just walking around grad school. But when you go to an interview, you have to dress better than you are probably used to dressing. Leave behind the backpack, unless you're in astronomy. Carry a briefcase. You can get them really cheap at places like Office Max and stuff like that, TJ Maxx. Make sure you've mastered the eye contact and the handshake so that you have the confidence and authority that comes with level eye contact. Think about your speech patterns. At the Professor's Inn, we do interview prep by Skype. It's live, it's individual. People come on and we do a mock interview. At least 50% of the people we work with talk like undergraduates. And talking like an undergraduate is not like talking like a professor. Those are two different things. So you may have very, very casualized speech patterns because of A, your age, B, your status, or C, because you do a lot of TAing and you find that it makes you really accessible and successful in the TA classroom. And those would all be true and totally valid. But that does not mean that those very, very undergrad, youthful sounding speech patterns are going to work for you in an interview, because they aren't. They're going to make you sound young and inexperienced and not professorial. So you do have to command professorial speech patterns. I always say, in the book, I say, sound more pompous. Practice sounding pompous. Talk to your dog really pompously. That will help. Anyway, prepare concise answers and practice them. You think, oh my gosh, I've been working on my dissertation for 5 years. I can do it in my sleep. No, you can't. You can. You can do it in your sleep badly. You can't do it in your sleep well. You have to really practice. It takes a lot of work. It takes writing it out, frankly, at least for me, and really practicing it and getting used to the ideas in a spoken form until they were very natural. Of course, the idea is not to sound robotic. The idea is to learn your elements, your content so well that it can come off spontaneously and still be highly, highly accurate and precise and not rambly. And last of all, for this purpose, you do need to be able to say in about one sentence or two at most, what is your contribution to your field? This is not the topic of your dissertation. This is not the conclusion of your dissertation. Those are separate things, equally important. This is, how does this study and these findings, how do they contribute to your discipline? When I was a professor, my grad students were never able to do this. This was really hard. And if you can do this, or I should say, in order to do this, it requires you to take that step that I talked about before from a grad student who's in this sort of subordinate learning mentality to a faculty peer who is in a I am shaping my discipline mentality. And again, it's hard and it takes practice. Let me check time here. Sorry, I lost track of when we started. So we're good. We're actually good. Okay, so I want to make sure that you guys all understand how the job application goes. It's quite regimented in the US, and that's a good thing. The reason it looks like this is in order to overcome or circumvent the old boy network, where it used to be that someone would call up and say, hey, I have a grad student for your position. And the other guy would say, that's great, send them over. And boom, that was it. It was done with a phone call. Now it's very regimented. So most jobs are advertised in the fall, early fall, August, September, October. Deadlines, October, November, December. You put, at the point of the deadline, all the viable applications are considered. If any app is incomplete, it will basically be thrown out. You don't get a second chance these days. In my day, you did, but now because of human resources and rules, affirmative action rules, plus the sheer numbers they're dealing with, they cut you off. If you're missing a letter, then you aren't considered. Once all the applications are in, each faculty member will choose their long short list, which, like I said, 20, 25 or so, and they meet to hammer it out. And some of them everyone will agree on a handful, and then they'll start negotiating and trying to persuade each other for the others, and they will come up with that list. That list may be invited to a conference interview. That list will probably be asked for writing samples, and or a Skype interview. And at that point, based on that, they will come up with a short list, and that's actually the word that they use, of invitees to the department for campus visits. Most public universities tend to do 3 who are invited and 2 alternates. The campus visits happen typically about 48 hours, 1 to 2 nights, and after that, the whole department votes to approve. Well, I actually got ahead of myself. They actually vote on acceptable, thumbs up, or unacceptable, meaning that they may consider one of the candidates or more of the candidates who came not worthy of considering for the position no matter what, and those people are removed. And then of the acceptable candidates, they are ranked 1 and 2. And then number 1 is offered the job. And then they negotiate the job. And if they accept the job, the search is successful. And if they don't accept the job, then they go to candidate number 2. If nobody accepts the job, nobody is acceptable, or situations like that, that's called a failed search, and they don't hire anybody. Well, no, sorry, they go to their to the alternates, and then they try to make one of the alternates work. If nothing works out, then it is really a failed search, and they don't hire for that year. Presumably, that's actually fairly uncommon. Most of the time, searches do not fail. All right, so that's how that goes. Now, I've given you all the background about how to create a competitive record and how stressed out and distracted the readers are. So what now do you need to do with your newly competitive record to make it through that stage? You want your documents to be short. That is the most important thing. Don't ramble on and on and on. So cover letter, 2 pages. Don't go over 2 pages. Teaching statement, 1 page. Don't go over 1 page. Research statement, 2 to 4 pages. STEM fields tend to be 4 pages. Humanities tend to be 2 pages. Psychology tends to be 4 pages. I don't know why that is. Social sciences tend to be on the lower end, 2 pages. The CV has no page limit. It can be as long as it needs to be to cover your record. Now, I want to make sure that you really, really get a good model for a CV and make a professional CV. Please don't neglect that task. This is your calling card. It shows whether you get it or not, whether you're really a player or not. So please don't neglect your CV. Now, in terms of the rest of the narrative documents, the cover letter, the teaching statement, the research statement, please focus on facts and not feelings. So that's point number 3 that I want you to remember. Facts, not feelings. Outcomes, not process. If any of you are Buddhist, this is the exact opposite of Buddhism. This is outcome, not process. Don't tell us a story of your evolving work that brought you to where you are. They don't want to know. They want to know, what is your topic? How did you research it? What did you conclude? What is its contribution to the field in 1 to 2 sentences? And what have you published? Oh, and who funded it? That's what they need. So remember, when you think about the temptation that everybody has to make these emotional appeals, and believe me, I get it. The job market is so stressful. It's so stressful. And you get desperate. People get desperate. And desperation makes for really bad writing, by the way. So you have to resist it. And then suddenly it brings out I'm so excited and to apply for this job, and it would be such an honor to be among you, and I'm so passionate about teaching physics, and it's so meaningful to me too, and this is all this emotionalism. It does not work. And please remember the principle that I call the skepticism principle. It does not matter your field, whether you're in classics, whether you're in chemistry, whether you're in French, whether you're in physics. Academics, people who have PhDs, we do not respond well to emotional pleas. I mean, think about it. Do your professors respond well to emotional rhetoric and desperate claims? No. They respond well to evidence and argumentation and conclusions that are backed up with substantiation. So the same thing is true in your job applications. And yet at the same time, please do know, this is sort of returning to what I said before, your work, as good as it might be fantastic, it doesn't speak for itself. It does require articulation, and that articulation does take time. So here are the pitfalls. These are the pitfalls in your writing, in the cover letter, also in the teaching statement, also in interviews. The self-discovery, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about each. The self-discovery trap, hyper-emotionalism, telling not showing, and humility and pandering. So here's what the language looks like in terms of self-discovery. That's what do I call it? What do I call it? I call it the narcissistic narrative of self-discovery. I think that's what I call it. Yeah, it's this obsession with your own process. I've always been fascinated by, and that led me to pursue. And I approached it this way, but then I realized I really should approach it that way. And that inspired me too. And then I had the good fortune too. And working under the guidance of Professor so-and-so, I decided that's what we don't want. There's no time for that. That's wasting valuable real estate in your cover letter with a bunch of blathering verbiage that gets you nothing. They need the facts. My dissertation focused on this. I use this method, I use this theory, I reached these findings, I made this conclusion, it was funded by so-and-so, I'm now publishing it in this journal. That's what they need to know. Hyper-emotionalism has two forms. The first is obvious emotional words, fascinated, yearn, love, desire, believe, and what we call the P word. It's like the P word, don't use the P word. Passionate. Why are these words bad? Well, first of all, because nobody believes them, because they're just claims with no substantiation. Everybody in this room could say, I'm passionate about teaching. We'd have no way of determining who was telling the truth or not, so it's useless. But the other thing is it's overused, which means it's not distinguishing you. You think it's distinguishing you, but it isn't. However, so that's all, I think that's easy and obvious. Take emotional words out of your stuff. But emotionalism comes through in this other way as well, which is these adjectives and adverbs that people use to try to make their work look important. So, my work is an important and innovative exploration of a badly understudied topic in the field, and it utilizes unique methodologies that have yielded remarkable and new insights that will have wide impact. This sentence says absolutely nothing. Nothing that is usable for purposes of the job market. It is a bunch of empty rhetorical claims and desperate sounding rhetoric. People will not believe it. What they will believe are factual claims. My work is the first to examine X from the perspective of Y, using the method of Z. I find this, I conclude this, I publish this. Again, that's what will get you through. Now, another way of putting this is show, don't tell. So here is a very classic telling rather than showing sentence. And if you saw this, you'd probably be like, well, that looks legit. Like, there's nothing immediately wrong with this sentence. I'm a passionate and committed teacher who always finds innovative ways to engage student interests. There's also nothing right about this sentence. Every one of you sitting here could write this, and we would have no way of telling if it was true. Versus what I have below. As an example, in the Introduction to Anthro class, I teach fundamentals of ethnographic research. I assign many ethnographies. Students research a group in the community. They present their research in a class symposium. Students have nominated me for the blah, blah teaching award. That we can work with. All right, and last, excessive humility and pandering. So this comes out in a variety of ways. I'd actually like to point to the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth thing on this list, which is the most common. I would strive to, I would seek to, I aim, I try, I endeavor, I attempt. My dissertation attempts to show. I know all of you have used that. I've used it. Don't do it. My dissertation shows. Just remove attempt, try language from your verbiage. Pandering is more like, it would be an honor and a privilege to join your illustrious department. I would hope to be a scholar worthy of your standards. Some of you might think that would never happen, but I can assure you I edit out pandering from client job documents every single week. It's quite common. Other things, other common forms, are, I was fortunate enough, attributing your accomplishments to luck or to fortune. That is not true. I mean, in a great karmic socioeconomic sense, we're all fairly fortunate to be like operating, you know, but that's not an argument to work out in a job letter. In a job letter, your accomplishments are your accomplishments. They are not due to luck. All right, let me check time again. Okay, so I'm going to finish up here. The interview is everything that I've already said, just in a verbal form, which makes it harder because you're on the spot and you're nervous. It's very normal. When you prepare your answers, you want to make sure they are concise, don't ramble, that they are properly conceptualized, which means you're answering the question that they asked, and that you're giving an answer appropriate to that job. And finally, that they're well rehearsed, which I've already said. I want to return to number 2, just to give you a brief example, because I think it'll help. I had a client who was applying for a job in Asian art history. It was an art history job with a focus on East Asia. She was a Korean art historian, does the art history of Korea. So we were doing a Skype interview prep, and I said, as in the role play, I said, tell me about a course that you would develop for us. And she said, oh, I have a course I'm interested to develop for you. This was a school in Los Angeles. It's Asian American art communities in the Los Angeles area. And she proceeded to describe this course in great detail. It was a marvelous course. It was completely wrong for the job. The reason it was wrong for the job, if I were live, I would ask you to tell me, but since you're all very far away and tiny and it's very difficult, so I'll just answer it for you. The reason it was wrong for the job is because although it was a marvelous class, they were not hiring an Asian American art specialist. They were hiring an Asian art specialist. That means they needed her to teach courses on Korea, Japan, and China, not on Los Angeles-based Asian American artist communities. So that was a mistake that she made with the best of intention that really would have damaged her candidacy for that job. So all of you, extrapolate to your own fields. What kinds of misreadings might you do in an interview question? Make sure that you really, really answer, respond in interviews toward the specific job and field and priorities, specializations that have been identified in the ad. In other words, know your ad very well. All right, so here are the basic questions that are typically asked in the majority of interview settings. There will, of course, be others. There are going to be left field questions. There are going to be discipline-specific questions. This is just the beginning, scratching the surface. But if you can do these 8 questions, you'll be in good shape. I don't have time today to go through how to answer them. I just want to make sure you know them. You read my book, you will learn more about how to answer them. Do a role play with people in your department, with faculty if they're willing, help you to learn how to answer them. Please do not forget question number 8. Do you have any questions for us? People often forget that, think, oh, whatever, I'll just come up with something, or I'll say, no, not really. That's not how you do it. You have to have questions for them, and they have to be good questions. If you want to know what a good question is, we can talk about that in Q&A. All right, so the pitfalls that people make in interviewing, like I said, rambling, being disorganized, querulousness, speaking in an insecure tone, like, well, you know, I guess, I mean, I think that my contribution might be possibly, that's what I'm talking about, not targeting the specific needs. I just gave you an example of that. Being caught unprepared, you won't be because you have the previous slide. And then learning how to manage challenges, which I can talk more about in the Q&A if you're interested. So I'm wrapping up now, and I'm going to wrap up on a point that's important to me. You're going to go in the market. You're going to try. Some of you are not going to get jobs. At some point, you have to figure that you have to face the truth of that. I can't tell you how long you should try. It depends a lot on how much debt you have and how much income you have and how many dependents you have. So everybody's situation is going to be different. Someone who's single with no debt is going to be able to occupy this position longer than someone who's the primary wage earner and has 2 dependents. So, but in general, if you have looked for 3 years, you might want to consider moving on. You can do things even right now to prepare for the non-academic job search. Here's a list of 6 things you can do. I talk about them more in the last few chapters of my book. There's a lot of fantastic information on the internet because there are a lot of PhDs who have given up, left the academy, and then blogged about it because they're academics, so of course they did. So you don't need just this slide. There's a lot of info out there, but you want to begin to think in terms of skills and begin to let go of that identity. I'm an anthropologist, I'm a physicist, I'm an astronomer. It's hard to let go of those identities, but you have to. Nurture relationships with non-academic mentors. You might have to do some working for free. That's not a good long-term plan, but you might have to do some to build up your resume. Do the informational interview. In other words, find out information about other industries and fields from those who occupy them, work in them. You might have to get additional training, but I hope to God it's not more graduate school. I'm talking about little classes that can give you a certificate, or, you know, small skills that, I mean, they're not small skills, but they're very delimited skills. And then really think about what in your background allows you to solve real life problems in the moment. So in conclusion, I end with the idea, do not be yourself. And if your advisor says to you, don't worry about the job market, just be yourself. Be like, nope, no, not going to be myself. And the reason is, and by the way, my advisor said the same thing to me, and I believed her, and it was the worst mistake I ever made. The reason is because when you're a job seeker and when you're a grad student, you have been socialized to be insecure, to be defensive, to be paranoid, which is like endemic in grad school, to have imposter syndrome, to be fixated on minutia because that's what your advisor's fixated on. And so what happens is left to your own devices, you can be rambling, subservient, disorganized, braggy, all sorts of issues that arise. So beware of that. It's very common. Nothing wrong with you. But you have to practice. You have to create a profile, a persona that is a professional persona. So really consider in your writing and your speaking, what is your professional persona? What is your very, very concisely articulated research program? What is your 1 to 2 sentence contribution to the field? What is your forward-looking trajectory of publications and grant writing and conferences? What are your non-emotional ideas about teaching? Can you deal with challenges, which I didn't really talk about to save time, but we can talk, but can you take a challenge without disintegrating into a puddle of insecurity? And do you understand that you're being hired to teach specific courses? And can you organize your responses to speak to those things, not to your fantasy of what you think the department should need? So with the final thought, it is your career. I want to return to where I started. You are the captain of your professional ship. Academia is entirely based on external validation. That's not healthy. It's not a healthy environment, if you think about it. We live or die as academics based on external validation. Does my advisor think my work is good? Did my committee pass my proposal? Did the grant committee grant my work? Did the conference accept my application? Constantly seeking external validation. That's the way it is. You're not going to change that. It is our industry. But you can reclaim your own internal personal autonomy vis-a-vis those processes. Don't lose yourself to them. Remember that you are an autonomous individual. You can make your own choices. And it is okay to leave the academy. It is okay. And you are not a failure if you decide to do so. If you decide now in grad school, you've already decided, or later, at some later point, a few years from now. So with that, the information about working with me, if you're interested, you can just go to my website, and thank you very much.
So Karen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you're ready for questions?
Absolutely.
So the floor is yours. Who has a question? Don't be shy. Yes, own your question. I might have to repeat it to this FY.
What are some good questions at the end of an interview?
He asked about what are some good questions to ask at the end of the interview.
Sure. So I actually give a list of those in my book. So that's one place that you can follow up and check this out. Check out more. But basically, the principle here is that you want to ask questions that show that you understand them, that you get them. So they're surveilling you even when you're asking questions of them. So here's the easiest, most obvious example of how not to do it, which I think will show you, by contrast, what you do want to do, is if you are at a tiny teaching college that has a 5-5 load, which those jobs exist, and they say to you, do you have any questions for us? And your first question for them is, well, I'm very concerned about sources for research support so that I can get my writing done. Can you tell me about your junior sabbatical program? That is a terrible question because they don't have a junior sabbatical program. Only research institutions have them. And they don't support research, probably, for the most part. And third, by asking that, you look like a prima donna. You look like you don't understand that you're interviewing with Middle Tennessee State instead of interviewing with Berkeley. You look like you don't know who they are. They will disqualify you for that question. They will. They'll say, oh my God, this person has no idea who we are and what we do and what this job is. They're going to be miserable here, and they're not going to pursue you further. So that's a bad question. By contrast, for Middle Tennessee State, what you might want to say is something like, I'm interested in cross-listing my classes because I like to teach in an interdisciplinary mode. Could you tell me more about how that might be done on your campus? That's a good question because it shows that you're teaching focused and that you're really interested in working together with colleagues and doing innovative teaching. One last point about this, try to articulate questions that are not in a yes or no mode, because that shuts down conversation. And also, if the answer is no, you've made them look bad and you've made them lose face. So if you go to Middle Tennessee State and you say to them in a yes/no fashion, do you have a junior sabbatical program? What do they have to answer?
No.
They have to say, no. And they feel really bad about themselves. They feel really bad about their lives. They feel bad about the career choices that led them to that moment. And they are not happy with you. And so that's why, even if you were to either a good question or a bad question, regardless, if you ask it in an open-ended way, it gives much more scope for the human connection and much more flexibility. I'll stop there. There's much more to say, as there is on every single topic, but anyway, I'll stop there.
That's another question.
How can use the Twitter more efficiently, trying to communicate with the high profile people in the field? Just how can I just is that always good that if a lot of people in your field started follow with your Twitter?
So let me make sure I got it right. You want some strategies or tips on how to utilize Twitter within your field, and specifically in reaching out to some of those like high profile individuals in the field.
Mm-hmm. What is your field, first of all? I'm just curious.
Journalism, electronic media.
Journalism and electronic media.
Yeah.
Oh my, wow. You're like the person who should most be using Twitter. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So I'm just curious, or do you, the questioner, do you have a Twitter account now?
Yes, exactly.
He does.
And I'm just curious, like what, and I hope you don't mind my asking, but this just helps me to answer. How many followers do you have right now?
I think it's 50 right now. I think, but it's still a relatively small number. I think
50. You said
50.
Okay.
50.
Yeah, 50.
50. Okay. All right. So using Twitter is a gradual process. You can't just instantly transform yourself into a Twitter personality overnight. You know, not that you don't want to be a Twitter personality per se, but you want to be a recognizable voice and have a community of people in your field. It takes a little while, but you will see progress. As soon as you start, you will see results. That's one of the marvelous things about social media, and Twitter in particular, is that it is something that tends to develop quite quickly. So the first thing that you need to do is go around and follow the people that you are the thought leaders in your field, or that are colleagues. So they don't have to just be above you. They can be, colleagues of yours, peers, other grad students in your field, just a range of people. Follow a lot of people. As you follow them, their dialogues and conversations are going to come into your Twitter thread, and you are going to then comment. You're going to reply. You're going to engage in intelligent ways. Now, I'm trying to remember. I hope I do this justice. There's a thing called Twitter. I mean, the idea of Twitter etiquette. You want to do like 1/3 is engaging with other people's content. 1/3 is sharing and being like a curator of interesting stuff that you find on the internet, that you share, that you think others might be interested in. And 1/3 is your self-promotional stuff. Like, I did this, I did that, I'm at the conference today, I'm live tweeting this event that I'm at. So you don't want any one of those three things to overwhelm. If you're always self-promotional, people get pissed off and they'll stop listening to you. If you only ever retweet, you don't have your own voice. You're only a conduit for other people's voices. And if you only ever engage with others, people don't have a clear idea of who you are and what you stand for. So the tripartite way of approaching that is the best way. As you begin to engage with people in that way, others will begin to see you pop up. They'll be interested in what you say, what you share, and they will follow you back. After you reach a certain point of having about, a few hundred followers, then that's the foundation for you're beginning to see yourself engage in actual real-time dialogues about interesting things. When you are engaged in real-time dialogues about interesting topics, that's when you're networking. That's when you're building connections. Some of those people will stay Twitter connections. Some of them, though, if they're in your field, you're probably going to meet them at the conference. So they're going to turn into real-life colleagues of yours because you're going to be like, I'm going to the blah, blah conference. And then they're going to be like, I'm going to the blah, blah conference too. And you're going to say, I'm on this panel. And they're going to say, I'm on that panel. And then boom, you might even say, you want to meet up. Okay, let's have coffee. And suddenly that's a creation of a connection. So using those methods I just talked about, that's how you can use it effectively. It's not like Twitter gives you a job. Twitter does not give you a job most of the time, but Twitter gives you a wonderful profile and a community that little by little leads to all sorts of amazing resources for you. Some of the invitations I've had to speak internationally have come from connections that I've made on Twitter, for example, just as an example.
Yeah.
Who should we ask for recommendation letters? Like what do search committees care about the most? For how long someone has known you, or what are they looking for?
So how do we determine who to reach out to for letters of recommendation? What are some of the things that search committees are looking for in those individuals?
Well, so are you referring to my advice to find somebody not on your committee?
Like, for example, if someone has known you for a year, but they can speak more about your current work, is that better than someone who kind of lost touch with you, but they've known you for longer? Or what matters?
Yeah. She's asking more so, do you want depth in what they can say about you and your background, your experience, even if it's for a shorter amount of time, or maybe it's someone who you might not be as current with, but you've known them longer? How should you gauge who to ask for those recommendations?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer in assuming you're a current grad student and that you have obvious people already who are going to write for you, which is your advisor and at least one other person from your committee. And those people know you very well. They work with you all the time, worked with you deeply for quite a while, and they're right here on your campus. So if you are then wondering who that third letter writer should be, and you're thinking about cultivating someone who you don't know that well, then do think about the fact that 2 of your letter writers already know you very well indeed and have worked with you for many years. So in a sense, you don't need to replicate that exactly. What you want from that other person is the stature that they bring from another campus, preferably an extremely elite campus. So the goal here, and this is also related to the fact that my first job was at University of Oregon, which is, a solid R1, but not very high ranking in the great realm of research institutions. And so our faculty were great, they were solid, but they were not at Cornell, they weren't at Berkeley, they weren't at Chicago, they weren't at Harvard, and I really wanted to, and that is an issue. There is a real thing of institutional prestige, and it works against you if you aren't at one of the Ivy Leagues or public Ivies. So that's what this advice is about. It's about lending a little bit of additional prestige to your record. So in that light, the person absolutely has to know you. They have to know you. They're not going to write it for a stranger. They have to, you have to have played a fairly long game in cultivating them. That means, go back to my advice, organize a panel for your conference. You invited so-and-so to be the discussant for that panel. You went out to dinner with them. You hit it off. It was good. You follow up immediately after the conference with an email saying, I really enjoyed meeting you. Thank you so much for your generous time. I really appreciated your ideas and what you contributed to the panel. And I was thinking about what you said in your comments, and I blah, 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 blah. And then they respond. You have a dialogue on email. And then you say, could I possibly impose on you to consider reading a chapter of my dissertation? I would value your input tremendously. They say yes, you send it to them. They send you back comments. You dialogue a little bit more. You meet up at another conference. Suddenly, this is like 6 months to a year, you now have a relationship. At that point, you ask them to write for you. They may have to say no. The reason they may have to say no is they may have their own students who are competitors with you. And their first loyalty is, of course, to them, and that's not personal. But they may be able to write for you. Now, they will not know you as well as your own advisors do, and that's okay. They don't need to, but they have interacted with you to some degree. They have read a couple of your chapters. They've seen you present at a conference. They can evaluate your potential in the field. That's sufficient. And they have Berkeley after their name. They have Columbia after their name. I'm sorry to say that institutional prestige counts for so much. I wish it didn't, but it absolutely does. And by the way, that issue of institutional prestige is all over the academic news right now. These guys just did a, sorry, not being very academic, these guys did the study, and it was published in the Chronicle and Inside Higher. Oh, and actually it was published in Critical Inquiry. And I put it on the Professors in Facebook page. So if you're curious to know more about the role of institutional prestige, and it is a very large role indeed in the job market, go onto my Facebook page and you will find it. And you can click through and you can read the article yourself. So I hope that helped to answer the question and to clear up the priorities that you should have when you're looking for a recommender.
We have a few more minutes if we have some more questions.
I guess, oh, sorry. No, sorry, you go ahead. Okay, so I guess I was just wondering where the postdoc sit in all that, because I have the impression it was straight from grad school to the job, and at least in my field, it's really rare to not do at least 2 postdocs, and so I was wondering how that would articulate.
Where would you fit in postdocs in terms of like advice, what to do in between finishing graduate school, going on into the workforce?
What is the field of the questioner?
What's your field?
Ecology.
Ecology? Ecology.
In a field like ecology, postdocs are normative. They're a normative step after the PhD and before a tenure track job in many cases. So you would absolutely want to have one. And you might even have more than one. You might have 2. And they may be multi-year postdocs. And so this could extend, the timeline before you get a tenure track job quite a bit. In a field like ecology, that's not a problem. That's actually normative, like I said. And you're continuing to build your skill set and your publication record, I hope. Sometimes people in postdocs have trouble being able to actually publish their work because they're in somebody else's lab. So if you could possibly manage it, you do have to build your own publication record. But in any case, you could end up with a better record after that than before. So I do encourage it with one absolutely enormous caveat, and I'm sure you're already aware of it. Anyone in a STEM field here is the permadoc problem. The fact that the STEM fields have their own particular version of job market hell that is not shared by the humanities and social sciences, which is the continuing, ongoing postdoc that never, ever, ever translates into a tenure track job. There are systems of exploitation in the postdoc specific to STEM fields, and the pay is low, and the workload is extremely heavy, and there are many, many more people in postdocs than there are tenure track jobs. And so for many people in STEM fields, the postdoc sort of delays the inevitable in that you are still looking for that tenure track job. You still don't find it, but you have now sort of tread water for a number of years while you were looking for it. And that is not necessarily helping you, because if you do have to radically switch careers and reinvent yourself for a non-academic realm, 10 years is a long time. So if you spent 10 years as a postdoc and then you do it, you're 10 years older than you were when you started. So that's my caveat, is just be very, very aware of those systems of exploitation and systems of kind of stagnancy that can happen in the postdoc. But of course, you will probably, I would assume that you're going to take at least one at this before you know, as part of your normal professional trajectory.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what advice do you have for an interview situation where you are given a question that you don't expect or that you don't have a good answer for?
Mm-hmm.
Good response.
Yeah.
Did you catch that?
I did catch it. That's the hardest. It's so hard. And you know what's funny is I remember the questions I bombed in my interviews in 1996, like they were yesterday. I remember them so clearly, and I still resent them. But there are ways that you can't anticipate every question. You will get caught off guard. This is true. So and one time I was asked a question. I distinctly remember this one. They said, "So tell us, Karen, how would you teach our blah blah course?" And I, like a total idiot, said, "Gosh, I don't know. How would you teach it?" Like, what do you not get about this whole context that we're in right here? Anyway, so don't do that. Don't do that. What you want to do is you're like, oh, damn it, I never thought of that class. I never thought of it. I didn't prep for that class. First of all, you never want to walk in to an interview not having prepped for all the basic classes. Just to take one example. Please, please, please don't forget to prep for the intro class, the survey class, the methods class, the theory class. Many people, including me, my students, my clients, go in with all these fancy teaching ideas about the fancy classes, but forget that 90% of what people teach are these really boring basic classes. So please prep for that. Now, in terms of your general question, how do you handle a question you're not prepared for? What you want to do is say something like, so say they challenge you on your research and they say, I find, your conclusion, it's interesting, but I must say I don't find it, particularly compelling, given that Nelson just published a very contradictory finding in the Journal of blah, blah, just a few months ago. And you're like, oh my God. You say something like, well, thank you for raising that important question. Stall for time. Nelson's work is interesting. I also read that article. I found it very illuminating. I wouldn't say that Nelson's findings contradict mine. I would say that we're looking at two very different projects, two very different topics, or looking at the same topic, but from two very different perspectives. Nelson is focusing on this. I, by contrast, am focusing on this. Consequently, we might seem to be reaching different conclusions, but in fact, what we're actually doing is teasing out different implications related to a different differential set of conditions. So in other words, what I tried to illustrate by that is that you don't get hung up in the putative topic of their question if you can't engage with it in a productive way. You use it as a jumping off point to bring it back to yourself. And that's what you have to do. If you literally cannot engage with the thing that they brought up and you don't know it, then it is best to say, I haven't looked, so this is a slightly different thing. If you haven't read Nelson's article, I haven't read that article. I have read quite a few other things by Nelson. But I do think that he's doing interesting work, but it's really quite different than what I'm doing. To get back to what I'm doing, blah, 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 blah. So you do a little bit of what I call academic jujitsu, where you don't attack the questioner directly because it's a bad look and you'll lose that battle because you're just the job candidate. So you don't say, well, Nelson's an idiot, and I can't believe you asked me about him. Instead, you say, oh, that's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking it. I myself have given some thought to related issues, and here's what I would have to say. Everybody saves face, and you get back onto your secure territory. And it takes practice. It does. Yeah, this is not a skill people are born with.
This is where I'll plug my office. You can practice your interviewing skills at the Center for Career Development.
Yeah, do that. Do that.
Any final questions? Yeah.
Is there an ideal time to apply for a non-academic job in your last year?
What's the ideal time to apply for non-academic positions?
So here's the interesting thing for all of us who have PhDs and we're used to thinking in this really regimented academic job market. Non-academic jobs are constantly flowing in this completely chaotic, amorphous way that is utterly bewildering. And the weird thing, some of you may have heard the statistic, 70% of jobs, and by jobs they mean non-academic jobs, they mean all the rest of the jobs of the world, come to you through personal connection, not through an ad. So what that means is that you really want to just view it as an ongoing process. Make sure that everybody that you know in life knows you're looking for a job, knows that you're exploring various other realms. You don't know which connection is going to bear fruit. You have no idea. You could go to your hairdresser and you say, you know what, I decided I'm over it with academia. I'm gonna look for a job in the blah blah field. And your hairdresser is like, that's interesting. You know, next time you go back for a haircut a couple months later, hairdresser says, hey, remember that thing you were telling me about? Well, it turns out one of my other clients is actually the president of a local company that does that very thing that you were just talking about. Do you want me to see if he has time for you? That's a way that the non-academic job market works, is that you just make these kind of connections and they're very holistic and multi-directional and unpredictable. So start that now. I'd start it right away. For everybody, even those of you who want academic jobs, I would just start getting more flexible in your thinking. Just explore. There's no harm in exploring. And then as you gain more information from all these conversations, you can start applying it at any point. Now, if you're going back to that slide I had where I said apply for 3 years before you give up, I mean, yeah, give the academic job market the real college try. Really give it, try hard, do your best. But I'm not saying don't try, but you can look into the post-academic, non-academic world from this very moment. No matter what year you are in your program, you can start exploring it. So, and I think it's a great idea to do that.
Maybe tapping out with the question.
Yeah, that's okay. It's late in the day there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right. I forget you're in a different time zone.
Yeah, very much so.
I just wanted to ask about the company that you work for. How expensive is it?
Oh, what are your what's your pricing, or like what's ballpark for tapping into your services?
Oh yeah, well, we have all kinds of different things. We have webinar recordings. So I'll start at the lowest and go up. Webinar recordings that are $50, and that some of the webinars walk you through interview techniques, the cover letter, the CV, teaching statement, research statement. We have a product called Art of the Cover Letter that is $79, and that is an all digital product that walks you through with videos and blog posts and templates and worksheets how to create your own cover letter. And then beyond that, we have then after beyond those two sort of package products, then there's working with me and my team individually, and that is $150 for a document, and then that takes you through a set of 4 really, really intensive edits, individual edits by me, where you go write it, send it to me, I tear it apart, I send it back to you, you do a bunch of edits, you send it back, I tear it apart again. Not just in a negative, you know, like undermining way, but in a way that's like, you know, here you are using emotion language, which is like really common, you know, throughout, you know, in all of this, especially in your teaching paragraph, here, 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 and here. And here is this writing technique or habit that you have that is less effective than it could be, and so on and so forth. And that takes it through 4 drafts and until you have a really, really great finished product. So those are 3 options. There are others as well, but I'll stop there. Those are the 3 main options.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think we're at our time, so if we could please give a round of applause again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll come back so you can see me, Karen. Thank you. And I'll follow via email.
Okay, great, Katisha. Thanks so much for today.
No problem. Have a good day.
You too, bye.